I'd like to start off chapter 2 with a simple declarative sentence. When you paint, your biggest hurdle is controlling value. If you can control value, you're on your way to a good painting, even if you're working in color. Value is the most important thing. The reason value is the most important is that it is the fundamental that reveals light and form. Value is also one of the more difficult things because whenever a plane changes, that is, changes direction, it comes with a value change. And I'm in this 3D software here, and I've got this sphere loaded up, but it's a sphere that's made of a lot of planes. There's a lot of little changes of plane in there, so it's not perfectly smooth. And I've lit it with a light. This is a light right here, and the light is, coming down from this top right sort of angle, and it's causing light and shadow. Now, the light and shadow is very obvious. You can see like the bottom area that's very dark, it's shadow, and the top area is comparatively much lighter, so it's light. But within those families, within the light, within the shadow, we can see that each little triangular plane change is getting its own value. Like this value here is slightly lighter than this value here, and this value here is slightly lighter than that value. And then we can look in the shadow. This value here on this plane is slightly darker than that value. This kind of represents the complexity of nature. When you look outside in real life or just around your room right now, you're going to see a lot of value changes. And again, one of the reasons painting is hard is that it's difficult to keep track of these values. So we need a system by which we can simplify. Otherwise, we'll just go crazy with trying to replicate all these tiny value shifts. So I'd like to show you now the method that I use for simplifying values in all of my work. Be it realistic or cartoony, it doesn't matter. Everything starts with the light source. The light source determines how the planes will be illuminated, and of course the angle that you're looking at the object does not change the light. The light will still cast all the same planes in shadow and all the same planes in light despite the angle that you're looking at it from. So knowing where the light is a critical first step. The second step is to determine the dividing line between light and shadow. I think of light and shadow as two families, and they're two families who don't get along with each other. They fight if you mix them. So we have to draw a fence between the two families' houses to separate them. In this example here, I would draw that fence line like this. This tells me that everything on this side of the fence is where the light family lives, and I should use lighter values. And conversely, everything on this side of the fence is where the shadow lives, so I should use comparatively darker values. And this brings me to perhaps the only rule of painting. Are you ready? It's the only time you'll ever hear me say the word rule. The rule is, your light values must remain lighter than the shadow values. And conversely, your shadow values must remain darker than your light values. This is the key thing we do as painters to keep our values separate, and therefore readable as light and shadow. And the first step I recommend taking in simplifying light is to average out the light values and the shadow values into just one value each, so one value for the light, one value for the shadow, average values, and block those in first. So you're not getting caught up in every little plane change. You're looking at the big picture, big area of light, big area of shadow. So this sphere, when simplified down to average light, average shadow, would look something like this. Notice I've grouped the cast shadow in with the shadow on the sphere, the form shadow, so they're all just one value, and likewise in the light, it's all just one average value. So essentially there are no little plane changes anymore. Think of this as like a comic book style rendering where you just have black and white. And if your fence line between light and shadow is accurate, and you're using comparatively light versus dark values, you should be able to see the beginnings of form and light here. And a sphere is a great thing to practice on because a sphere is so easy to draw. In just a moment, I'll show you this exact lesson on the Asaro head, but for now, let's just continue on with this. Okay, the next step is to introduce a little more complexity, and I'll go back to our 3D model. The complexity we want to introduce has everything to do with the light side, and this is not a rule, but in general, the light side should contain more information than the shadow side, mostly because our eyes respond to light. That's what our eyes do, they're receptors for light. We don't do so well in shadow, comparatively speaking. So a lot of painters, both painters of the past and modern day painters, put more information in the light than they do in the shadow. Now, the information we want to introduce in the light is called a halftone. A halftone covers the planes that are turning away from the light but are still getting light. In this case, it's all these planes on this part of the sphere. These planes are still being hit by the light source, but are turning away from that light source, so they're a bit darker. Halftones can be quite confusing because we can see a lot of value changes here. Like each one of these little planes here has a different value. And what we don't want to start getting is mired into all these value changes. So just like we did with light and shadow, giving them both one average value, we do the same with halftone. We take all these little halftones, again, the planes that are turning away from the light, but still in the light, we average them together and we give them one value. So let's go back to our diagram here, and I will now simplify all those complex halftones we just saw into a simplified halftone that looks like this. Now you might be like, oh, but you're losing so much information. Yes, that's the point. You need to change reality to a simplified reality in your work. This is not to say you can never add complexity to this. In fact, in later painting demonstrations in this class, I'll get progressively more and more, let's say, realistic or detailed. But this is how we have to think in order to maintain value control. Remember, value control is all about structure. And what I'm showing you here is not a finished painting of the sphere, but a system we can use to simplify the complexities of real life and get down to that core, essential structure. And the best part is, it's simple, it's manageable. I've only used 3 values so far: an average light, an average shadow, and an average halftone. Those, according to me, are the most important things to know for value control. Now, the lesson is not finished here, but I'm going to move on to some demos where I will show you how to use this, and we will then expand on it. So let's go ahead and do that.